Welcome back guys to the series in which we are doing a detailed breakdown and a recap, scene by scene of each episode of the 4th season of Stranger Things. Second episode, Vecna's Curse, starts off by answering a few questions about how our favorite Chief of Police, Jim Hopper, survived the deathly destruction of the Russian machine at the end of Season 2. Then we are cut back at Hawkins where, Max wakes up from a bad dream, swallows some pills and finds out that the girl which went into Eddie's trailer last night was murdered. Not only this but the girl was Chrissy, the cheerleader which she saw yesterday coming out of the counselor's office as well. Back at California, Mike arrives to meet Elle and Will. Frankly he is there just for Elle. The boys share a very awkward moment where Will hides the painting which now, I feel is a picture of them playing D&D back at Mike's basement. Elle makes plans to go to Rinkomania and has the day planned out. Robin and Steve have a fast-paced conversation as always and they see the news which at this point doesn't share the victim's name. The basketball gang finds out the news and the cops arrive to have a chat with Jason. Nancy finds out about the murder too and has a flashback of how she lost her friend, Barb, in Season 1. She takes Fred along to the site of the murder. Max, unable to reach any of her friends, reaches Dustin at last and she tells him about the girl which she saw murdered was none other than Chrissy. And that Eddie is suspect number 1. Dustin, not convinced, says, there is only one way to find out, which is a dialogue used multiple times thereafter in the series. They both share a moment in which they think the Mind Flayer may be back, but both of them doesn't say it aloud. Murray Bauman aka Bald Eagle arrives at California to check the letter Joyce got from Russia and quickly denies the credibility of the letter. As Murray always does, he explains his thoughts in a rather eccentric way but at the end Joyce convinces him to look into the matter, for which Murray says, there is only one way to find out, and that he will do it his way. Further we follow Hopper's story, which I am not fully sure what happened here. Look. Hopper, I guess, dived into the gate and the gate opened in Russia on the other side. But if we follow Season 2 and 3, we know Alexei says Russians have been trying to open the gate. For the gate they required a great amount of energy which they had, but the other important part was the location. The location they needed was Hawkins. So, they infiltrated Hawkins and build the Starcourt Mall and build the hidden lab under it. By this, the Russians were not able to open a gate in Russia. If we consider Hopper diving into the gate and getting the opening into Russia, it seems tricky. On top of that, how were the Russians able to contain the contamination from the gate? Because one of the main plot of Season 2 was the lab not being able to stop the spread of the vines from the gate. The other part, say Hopper didn't dive into the gate and when he climbs the ladder of the lab under the mall. It is impossible because the Russians were supposedly captured, because at the end of Season 3, we see the cops and Dr. Sam Owens entering the mall. So, they must have captured anyone alive. Not fully aware of what happened. I guess we will find an explanation in the final 2 episodes of Season 4. Or rather Volume 2. Coming back to story, in California Elle, Mike and Will go to the Rinkomania where Will realizes Elle lying to Mike about having friends and other things. Jason gets to know about that Chrissy was with Eddie when she died. Dustin and Max barges into the video store and set up base of operations to find Eddie with Steve and Robin. Nancy and Fred reach Eddie's trailer where Fred has a strange moment where we get the hint something bad is going to happen to Fred. Jonathan hangs out with his friend Argyle in a funny exchange where Jonathan says he got the letter from the college in which Argyle is going. Argyle freaks out because Jonathan and Nance were going to the same college. Jonathan expresses he doesn't want his mother and Will to chase a dream which isn't his. That means he only decided to go to Nancy's college because of Nancy. In all this Ms. Argyle suggests the palm tree delight. The most heartbreaking scene in which Angela makes a mockery of Elle as she sees her with Mike. This level of bullying is just too much for anyone. They took their time to build the scene and was on point with the brutality shown. Murray assembles his VPN of 80s and Joyce calls the number to find out about Hopper. Enzo picks up the call and demands $40,000 which Hopper left for Elle. By this Joyce and Murray gets convinced. Enzo says come to Alaska, hand over the money to Yuri and then he will make Hopper unstuck. This becomes a clue for Murray which we will address later. After the Russians torturing Hopper, they find him fit to serve their motherland and Hopper is sent to hell, which is Kamchatka. Lieutenant Colonel arrives by a chopper to Indiana and here we get the sense of how bonkers this season is going to be with the government been involved. Back with the basketball boys, Jason whose girlfriend was murdered, feels Eddie had to do something with it. Jason again gives a speech and gets all the guys pumped up and they agree to find Eddie the freak. The detective gang of Dustin, Steve, Robin and Max does their Sherlock magic and tracks down Eddie's hiding place. This scene is actually a nod to many 80s movies. Now we get to the third act of the episode where things kind of get serious. Nancy talks to Eddie's uncle to find out more about the murder and this scene is really very tense. With the surreal sight and cold-looking conversation Eddie's uncle tells Nancy, this isn't the work of Eddie, but of Victor Creel. He tells her that Victor lived in the 50s and murdered his whole family and the way Chrissy was killed, was the same way he killed his family. With bones twisted, eyes taken out. He tells her maybe Victor broke out of the asylum he was put into. Horrified Nancy, notices Fred missing and with night approaching goes to the cop and asks for help. This scene is terrifying because as the story of Victor Creel is told, we see side by side Fred seeing the clock, and again this. We cut back to Murray and Joyce where they figure out Enzo is a guard and Hopper is imprisoned and bribed Enzo to unstuck him. Sounds like Jim. At Ring-O-Mania Will and Mike try to find Elle and Will expresses his sadness over Mike not giving him attention, written only a couple of times over the year. I hated Mike in this scene and I know everyone did as well. Mike was really not cool in this scene. Elle approaches Angela, asks her to apologize to her but it ended up like this. A skate attack. Her as Elle hears Mike saying, "What have you done?" brings back flashes from Elle's past of those dead kids at Hawking's lab. We're in the end game of the episode where Eddie is traced by Steve and company. This was again an intense scene with a bit of comedy between Steve and Dustin. Eddie threatens Steve with a broken bottle, Eddie calms down as he sees his pal, Dustin. Eddie calms down. They assure him they're here to help and want to know the truth about the murder of Chrissy. Eddie says, "You won't believe," but little does he know what these other kids have seen. This was a fabulous scene in which as Eddie describes the death of Chrissy, we see Vecna attacking Fred. It was an intense scene. Dustin and Eddie names the person who did the attacks as Vecna. If you don't know, all the villains right from the first season, Demogorgon, Mind Flayer, all these names are taken from the game Dungeons & Dragons. So, they figure out the thing attacking is Vecna, which is a dark wizard of an unknown dimension. Fred is killed by Vecna and the episode ends.